Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, when like you or like our, the listeners like think about that, it's like the people that we're most like magnetized and attracted to are the ones who are sharing like their authentic experience.
Namaste. You're listening to the Sivana podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SivanaSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Sivana family. Welcome back to the show. Today, we are talking about healing ourselves by uncovering our root story. We're going to discover that root story that's maybe keeping you trapped and blocking clarity towards your calling. This podcast is sort of like a mini breakthrough session with our guest today, Danielle LaRock. She has been called a visionary empath and a small but mighty powerhouse. She's a breakthrough practitioner, which means that she empowers purpose-driven people to heal themselves from disease and misalignment through actualizing their calling to heal the world. She is going to be teaching us today how we can find what she calls our core beliefs by sort of studying our thought patterns. And these can be powerful catalysts for our own transformation. Danielle's also going to share with us tons of practical examples of how she and her clients have either released or reframed their root stories so that we can do the same. Before we dive in, I just want to thank you for being here, for listening, for your feedback, and remind you of the two top ways that you can support the show. The first being by leaving a review here on iTunes. That means so much and helps get the show in front of more people looking to transform their life through yoga and meditation. And the second way is to make a purchase at SivanaSpirit.com. The product that I'm featuring or highlighting today is Sivana Spirit's prayer wheels. The concept of a prayer wheel was inspired by the method of Buddha's teaching, turning the wheel of Dharma. Dharma in Buddhism means law and order, and you can think of this as sort of the laws of the universe. So prayer wheels have been found throughout Tibetan culture. It's believed that as the wheel is spun, the practitioner is gaining wisdom and destroying negative karma, thereby progressing along their spiritual path. I encourage you to explore these gorgeous prayer wheels at SivanaSpirit.com. And remember, for the prayer wheel or anything that calls to you, you can use that code podcast30 for 30% off your first order. All right, now let's dive in to today's episode with Danielle. Danielle, welcome to the show and thanks so much for being here. In a nutshell, can you explain for listeners what it means to heal yourself? Because when I think of that phrase, heal yourself, I think of it in the context of someone who's maybe been through a trauma. But I think the way you think about it is that we all need to do this work. We all need to heal on some level. Is that true?
My definition of healing is the realization that we're already whole. I haven't met a person yet, maybe I haven't met enough gurus on the planet, but I haven't met a person yet who isn't struggling with something on some level inside of themselves or in their life in some way. So healing is really just bringing us into a more integrated state within ourselves.
So even those of us who are doing well at work and maybe think we're following our calling, we potentially have some healing to do.
You know, it's interesting because sometimes I've even used the phrase like healing fully. And what I've realized over time is that I don't believe that any of us ever fully heals. I don't think that we ever come into like complete perfect alignment. I think that whenever that happens, that's when we pass over to the other realm. While we're on this planet, we're always balancing. We're always healing in the sense of it's a continuous iterative process. It's not something that ever completes itself.
So this is an ongoing process. So tell me and the listeners, how is it that you work with people on a one-on-one basis?
Yeah, so I work with people primarily through what I am trained in breakthrough work. I ended up doing training around this to actually heal myself. I was experiencing like a lifelong disease that I was diagnosed with when I was 11 that was put into remission by some really like heavy medication. But about mid-20s, my dad died. A lot of pretty intense stuff was happening in my life, and all of my symptoms came back and nothing was working. So I ended up traveling, going to different trainings, learning as much as I could. And so I went to a certain type of training around breakthrough work specifically. So that's how I start the process with my clients, is through a breakthrough immersion. And the aim of that is to basically uncover this deeper, like greater root story that's keeping them stuck in like some sort of misalignment or self-doubt or feeling less than, or for some people, it actually is manifesting as a physical disease. So that's the first aspect of my work, is really getting to the root of it. Because just like when you're out gardening or, doing some yard work and you got some weeds, if you just clip off the top of the weed, it's going to grow back. But when you pull something up by the root, when you address it kind of at this deeper level, then it not only is addressing one issue or one challenge, it ends up addressing all of the things that it's connected to. And so we're able—
It has a ripple effect through the whole garden, it sounds like.
It does. Yeah, exactly. So it ends up, you're able to see like a large amount of change in a short amount of time.
I know. And I love this phrase you're using, breakthrough work, because I'm just thinking, I'm like, who would not want to do that? It sounds like such a great phrase. So dig into that a little deeper. Tell us, what does this breakthrough work look like when you're working with someone one-on-one, and how does someone, like even people listening, for example, how do they figure out what that root cause, that root issue that they should be focusing on is?
Yeah. So the breakthrough work, like we kind of start out by just talking about like what are the problems that are coming up already. Like people typically come to breakthrough work because they want to create, like they have some sort of desire and they also have some sort of problem. So we kind of start out talking about the problems, knowing that we're not going to kind of sit with them or use them as excuses, but we're exploring like what is the relationship between all of these, what I call like surface level issues. So for somebody who's listening, they could actually do this with themselves by starting to identify like where are the areas in your life that you're struggling, like what situations are happening that seem to be causing issues. Like if you were at a breakthrough session with me, I'd say, why are you here? And we would just keep repeating that question until we get like the complete reason why you've showed up and why you feel like you need a breakthrough at this point.
Danielle, can you give us an example of what some of those surface level issues are? Is that things like maybe you're unhappy with your job or fighting with your partner or spouse, that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. These are the types of problems that you kind of see yourself like you're talking to your friend about them over and over again. So yeah, I see it a lot with people in their work. So like saying like, this is happening with my boss, or I just really don't like this job, but I don't know how to change it. Or a problem might be, I really want to like work with clients or work with people in some way that helps them heal, but I don't know how to do that.
I like how you described it as it's the sort of nonstop verbal stuff that you're like saying to other people when you're complaining, basically. It's like what you're complaining about on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's such a great way to say that. And I think I'm actually going to totally steal that from you as just a way to kind of simplify it. It's like, what are the things that you're complaining about? And so instead of feeling bad when you're complaining, you can just notice like, oh, I'm complaining. And so obviously this thing is like, it's coming up for a reason.
And so a client, I can imagine, or even think of myself, and, we're always in yoga working on trying to find that positive mindset and elevate our state of consciousness. But there's a variety of things, right, that come up that I have that sort of mental dialogue, whether I'm saying it to a friend or just internally, of things that I wish were different, things that I wish would change, but they often seem completely unrelated, right? Like one might be about, my home and how the space in my home is kept, and something else might be, completely unrelated, like having to do with my work. So how does someone sort of cobble together observing these surface issues in order to dig deeper and find what you're calling like this root issue?
Yeah. So the thing I love to do is find patterns. I don't know what it is about that, but I like doing this with myself, and I like doing it with other people. So if you want to do this with yourself, you can basically even just take out a sheet of paper and kind of start to put out like those surface level issues, those things you're complaining about on the top, and then start to see like what are like the related common themes between, or among all of those things. And then from there, you can start to work your way down into what is like the underlying like core belief that I have that's like perpetuating all of this.
Okay, this is really interesting. So can you give us an example of what some of those core themes and then a core belief might be? Maybe like an anonymized example from someone you've worked with, just to make it more concrete for me and the listeners.
I do this with myself actually on a regular basis. I am like an avid journaler, and if something's coming up for me, I'll take out my journal and I'll like work through this with myself. I have kind of like a funny example that maybe people can relate to. My partner, his name's Jonathan. He's a really wonderful guy, and he had put some gloves that he was wearing while he was working on his truck. They were soaked in gasoline, but he put them in the washer machine with all of our clothes, including my clothes, and washed them. So then everything smelled like gasoline. So now this might be something that somebody would kind of get annoyed about, and that would be totally valid. But what I was noticing with myself is that I was kind of getting inordinately like charged about it. Like it was causing me a lot of strife. And so I really just sat down with it one day and was like, what is going on here with this particular thing? And then I kind of, I think I took out a couple other issues that I was maybe having with him, or even with other people that I'm kind of related to, and found out that kind of like the theme in it was that like I felt like, oh, like I feel like I have to do everything, or like I feel like I'm being taken advantage of, or something along those lines. And like underlying that for me is like, well, what is the belief that's causing me to believe that I need to do everything? And for me, it was a lot around feeling like if I wasn't doing something, then like I wasn't going to get somewhere. It's like I just wanted to get to kind of this other place. So like I think a lot of the core beliefs end up being related in some way to like, I'm not good enough, something's wrong with me, I'm broken. They're usually like these short phrases that when you feel like you're just going about your everyday, like you might not like have that thought going on in your head all the time, but it's when you get down to it, like feeling like you're not enough, you're broken, or there's something wrong with you, like is going to perpetuate decisions and actions that are going to create a certain result in your life.
I love that you shared that personal story. Thank you for opening up and sharing that. I could relate to a lot of what you were saying, and I bet some of the listeners could as well. Just hearing you, I was thinking this core belief I feel I have that I was working on journaling the other day was just this sense of like, I'm unlucky, right? Like it's sort of like this glass half empty, or like the pie isn't big enough for everyone to have a slice mentality. And I can definitely see that when I do my journaling work as this core belief that isn't serving me, but shows up and is probably fueling a lot of that dialogue of complaint that we talked about before. So when someone is able to hone in or get a glimmer of that kind of thought, whether it's like the I'm unlucky, or what yours was, I'm the one who always has to do everything, what's the next step from there?
Yeah. So that first step that I kind of talked about, like in my overarching process, I call it feel, heal, real. So that's like I don't really like to use steps because they seem so like simple, and it's not always easy to just like feel. But feeling is just getting connected with that story, and kind of doing that self-inquiry. So the second like aspect or second step of that is what I call heal, which is like sometimes it involves releasing something or letting something go. And sometimes it means like bringing something in. So depending on what it is and the person and the situation, there's different techniques that you can use to actually release these beliefs and these stories at an unconscious level. Also be able to integrate or bring in kind of like a new story, like plant, like if you're pulling a weed out, so instead of just like leaving a hole in the ground, like you're planting a new seed there.
Right. It's like we pull the weed up, let's plant a flower in its place. So we're talking now about this healing step. I'm curious, can you give us some examples of what the release would look like and what the letting something in would look like? So for example, with release, I'm thinking maybe it's the emotion bubbles up, or maybe, you have like a long cry. I'm sure you could give us more sophisticated examples, but that's kind of what I'm picturing. And then for the inviting in example, how does someone do that? Is that where it's like working with affirmations or a personal mantra is sort of the next step? Can you walk us through those two scenarios?
Yeah. And both of those examples that you just gave are examples. Like we all are releasing and integrating on a daily basis. That's what we do. So there's a few different techniques that I use depending on what the challenge is. Like if the story seems like it has a lot of emotional charge to it, then I typically use a certain type of technique called mental and emotional release technique, which is basically a visualization technique that gets into your unconscious to release that emotion from kind of where it started from. Sometimes like our challenges feel like they're more like the mental level, like there's not necessarily a lot of like emotional charge around them. But the challenge is more in like the mind thought realm. And for this, that's where maybe like affirmations or reframing or approaching things differently with the story can be helpful. And then like on a spiritual or like energetic level, sometimes like there just needs to be some healing or some aspect of that. And so that's where there's things like energy work or like emotional freedom technique can work with emotions. It can also work with energy. So kind of basically what I kind of look at it as is like there's an integrative approach to healing, working on like the spiritual, mental, emotional, and then like physical aspects of yourself and your story.
I'm curious from your perspective, do you think in order to heal, a conversation sometimes needs to happen with a family member or even a friend sort of to resolve? Because I think a lot of maybe these core beliefs get set in our childhood, right? Or do you think someone can do this healing work completely on their own without having a conversation like that?
My personal belief around our stories is that we are the ones who create them. So like I'm the one who creates my story. I may have learned it from my parents or from other people around me or from my experiences, but I'm ultimately the one who has created that. So I can uncreate that. I don't need somebody else healing in order to do that. And at the same time, sometimes it is really cathartic and healing for not only you, but for the relationship and for the other person to have that conversation. So I feel like that's pretty situation dependent. But ultimately, like my answer to that would be like, it's not necessary to have that conversation or to go address that person. There are things that you can do with yourself to be able to release that old story and integrate a new one.
And I know your work is so much about helping people find their calling, right? Helping people find their true purpose. But it sounds like we end up self-sabotaging somehow along the way, right? Because we create a core belief that then fuels this inner dialogue and these stories that keeps us from our higher calling. Has that been your experience as you work with people?
Yeah, it has. It's been my experience with myself. I feel like I had like several like pretty big stories that I wasn't fully aware of that I kept living out that were like directly related to like disease in my body. And then me also feeling like misaligned with my work, or feeling like my life just wasn't like kind of flowing in its purpose lane, for lack of a better word. Like it just like feeling off in some way.
Yeah, and I love that phrase you just used, misaligned in your work, because I think that's something a lot of people at some point, I know I have felt, like you don't feel like you're living out your true calling. And there's this idea in society right now that, well, work is just for making money, right? And if you just make money from your work, you that's fine, and you can pursue your passion. In fact, you have more complete freedom to pursue your passions in an unrestricted way outside of your maybe 9 to 5, right? Because you don't need to make money from your art or your passion. So it has complete freedom. And that's something that's one approach, right? And then I think there's this other approach where it's like, no, living your life work is the goal. What are your thoughts on those two different perspectives? What is it that you recommend to people? Because I know there's those people who like jump off, take the leap of faith, right? To become the artist or the actor, or maybe pursue a dream that is a little less conventional, less financially stable perhaps, but that causes a different slew of problems.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like it answering, like if someone wanted to answer that question for themselves, they would need to look at what's important to them in their life. So I feel like we all have values that dictate what decisions we make with our life. So for example, I have a friend who she really, really loves working in public service. That's what she loves to do. And so she continues to do that. It's in alignment with her values. I would not say that she needs to like leave that job and go work for herself, because that's not what she actually wants to do. But if you do want to, like, if you don't feel aligned with your work, maybe you're working for someone else, or maybe hell, you're even working for yourself and you don't feel aligned with what you're doing. Like you have a choice to be able then to change the direction. And I don't think that there's like one right way to do that. Like you can take a leap of faith. Like you can leap and know that the net will appear, because it will in some way, shape, or form. And you can also take tiny baby steps to move in that direction, or somewhere in between. So I don't believe in like the thing that I was finding when I was sort of on this journey to like, and I still am on it, to kind of pursue my calling. It was like people would say like, this is how you have to do it. Like, this is like the paint by numbers approach to like finding and following your calling. And it's kind of ridiculous when you really think about it. Like we're all unique individuals and we're all going to have a unique journey. So I think it's more about finding it for yourself, finding what resonates most with you and going in the direction that brings you the most joy overall, just being congruent with your decisions.
I think that's great to share, and I completely agree. I think it's so personal whether you want to take that like leap into a new career or make that transition super slowly. I know I opted for the super, super slow, sort of safe route, and that's what felt comfortable and authentic to me at the time. And, who knows, maybe I would have gotten where I wanted to be faster if I had done the leap. But I think I agree with you. I think people really need to soul search and just do what feels right for them. Like there's no right way, paint by numbers way, as you say, to make a career change or pursue a big change like that. I know that you've written here that in discovering the root story that keeps us trapped, that root story is also blocking the clarity towards our calling. So if someone's listening and they're like, I don't know what my calling is, right? Like I know I'm unhappy. Maybe I've uncovered some of these core beliefs or something like that, but I'm not really sure how that translates into what I should be doing. Is there a correlation between that core belief and then maybe what someone's life purpose is or the work they should be pursuing?
Yes, that's what I've seen. My like experience has been that our greatest suffering and our greatest struggles are also what create our greatest strength. So the things that I've struggled most with are, interestingly enough, like the things that I like then help other people with. So I actually feel like if you are struggling or suffering through something now, or if you kind of were in the past, that is absolute fodder for like the direction that you're going in with your calling.
So, of course, I'm going to ask, do you have an example of that? I mean, either from your own life or maybe an anonymized client, like what the struggle was and then how that turned around to be like, oh, poof, that's what you should be focusing on. That's your gift.
Yeah, I had a client who she was struggling with actually a lot of things going on with her womanly parts, and the things that she kept saying as far as like what she wanted to create were like a lot of the words that she used were related to kind of like the symptoms that she was having. So what ended up happening is she ended up pursuing this path of like being like a whole person wellness coach and like stepping more into that this space where she was like holding space and like stepping into like this tangible reality of her being a healer in some way. And that was when she also was noticing like that her symptoms were also going away. So that's just like one example. Or another example I can think of is I had another client who like he was still working in his job, but he was like working on building like his side business, and he had so much going on. I think he would like go to bed at like 12 a.m. and get up at 4 a.m. And he had kids and his wife and like all this stuff was going on, but he was struggling with like this chronic illness and he was on like all this really heavy medication for it. But what we found was that as he started putting up like more boundaries around his calling, more boundaries in his life, that he was then able to pursue his calling more. And his work is around like empowerment and boundaries. So just interesting how like the things that they were suffering from the most were also then the things that they transmuted and were able to serve others because they had a direct experience with it.
Got it. So they then really needed to share what they had learned and experienced themselves. And I'm sure that made them such more powerful teachers as well because of that, because they had had that direct experience, that transformation with what they were working on.
Yeah, exactly. Because when like you or like our, the listeners like think about that, it's like the people that we're most like magnetized and attracted to are the ones who are sharing like their authentic experience.
Totally. That's so beautiful. So we are going to chat with you again, everyone. Danielle is going to come back. So make sure to tune into Thursday's episode. She's going to take this to the vision next level with us. What we do once we've connected with our authentic vision. So when we connect to something that calls to us, how do we then create a sacred offering from that? If you're someone who's maybe wanting to make a big change in your life. How can you best serve the world in your unique way and then actually create what Danielle calls an impact plan, basically an action plan to get you moving in the direction of your calling? That's what we're going to talk about on Thursday's episode. So you definitely don't want to miss out. Tune in on Thursday. And I just want to take a moment now to thank you for listening to this week's episode. Thanks for your encouragement, for your feedback. And you all know that nothing means more to me than your reviews here on iTunes, even if iTunes isn't normally how you listen to the show. My goal is to make this podcast everything you want it to be. I hope you have a beautiful day. I hope you think of some of the things that Danielle and I have talked about. Maybe see if you can catch some of those mental patterns and dig in, maybe do some journaling to find some of those core beliefs as well that she and I talked about on today's episode. So you'll be all ready for Thursday's episode where we're going to go even deeper. So much love from my heart to yours. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Sivana podcast. To find out more about Sivana, go to SivanaSpirit.com or follow Sivana on Facebook at Facebook.com/Sivana Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at SivanaEast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode. And thank you for listening to the Sivana podcast.
I would have to just go with like, it's sort of like my tagline or my motto, but like, it's not just that to me. Like, I believe that the world needs the real you. That is a process of like uncovering like what the real you is. But I feel like whatever you can do today and tomorrow and the day after, like that helps you feel like you're being more the real you, like that is the direction that you want to go in. And that is the direction that's going to help the world in the biggest way.
Namaste. You're listening to the Sivana podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SivanaSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Sivana family. If you missed Tuesday's episode, we're talking to Danielle LaRock. She has been called a visionary empath and a small but mighty powerhouse. She is a breakthrough practitioner. How cool is that? Breakthrough practitioner. It means she empowers purpose-driven people to heal themselves from disease and misalignment through actualizing their calling to heal the world. So in Tuesday's episode, if you missed it, we talked a lot about this idea of healing yourself, whether it's from disease or just maybe some negative thought patterns you have. So you want to make sure to check out Tuesday's episode. Today, Danielle's going to take us deeper. She's going to tell us how we can connect with our authentic vision, how we can really step into a calling that feels bigger than just ourselves, but really like feels so right. And then how we can best serve the world in our own unique way and kind of have an action plan around our calling. So if you missed Tuesday's episode, make sure to get the first half of this story. And Danielle, thanks for coming back and walk us through how we can connect with a vision for our lives. Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, it's great to be back. And I love talking about this stuff. I love talking about healing. And I also love talking about kind of what I call like calling actualization, which is really like seeing your vision like come into like real life. So in my work, when I was kind of looking back at my own like journey of like starting a purpose-driven business and doing work that aligned with me, what I found was that for a while I was kind of trying to figure out what like my vision was. Like at first it started out as kind of like this like vague or like kind of larger like esoteric type of thing where it was like I want to help people feel good. Like that was kind of what it started as, because I think that on a fundamental level, like all of us want to help the world and contribute in some way. And through kind of the different trainings that I took or kind of the different work I was doing with other coaches, I was noticing that I was getting really like lost in like other people's ideas of what needed to happen in the world. And I realized that their ideas, like there was nothing wrong with them. Their ideas were just authentic to them. And what I realized was so important was that my vision felt authentic to me. So that's one of the aspects of my work with people is I help them discover their own authentic vision. And the word authentic, like I'm big on kind of like looking up some of these words that maybe we don't really know, like we use them a lot, but we don't know what they mean. And when I looked up the word authentic, it actually means of like undisputed origin or it's genuine. So authentic means that it's something that's really coming from you. And a vision is like being able to like see or anticipate something that's not currently in existence. So I work with people who do tend to be more like visionary, like they kind of see the bigger picture and they want to be able, like they can almost like see it in their head, but they don't completely know how to take that and then like put it like out there in a tangible way.
Right. So it's like you were saying, like this idea of I want to heal people, but it's like, what does that look like? I mean, because you could do that as a massage therapist, or you could do that as a life coach, or you could even do that as an executive, probably in the right circumstance.
Yeah, it's so true. So I work with people on kind of discovering kind of like their why behind their vision, which I feel like is so important because if we don't know why we're doing something, then we can come up with like a ton of different whats, like a ton of different alternatives. But it's not about jumping to, the choices or the options. It's more about connecting with the greater reason why you want to move in like a new direction.
And does that why have anything to do with the core belief we talked about in Tuesday's episode? Or how do people uncover that why statement? Because that sounds critical to this whole process.
Yeah. I've done a lot of different types of exercises around like uncovering your why. And I found that my why was like completely related to like the kind of the deeper root story that was also keeping me stuck. Like I feel like my root story was a lot around like feeling like I was broken, I wasn't good enough, something was wrong with me, and that I just like couldn't love myself. I feel like my why behind like not only the work that I do, but the way that I practice living my life is to love unconditionally so that we can all make a difference. So what I'm finding is that like the more that I'm able to love myself, the more that I'm able to like support other people in loving themselves unconditionally, I feel like we're able to make more of a difference in the world from that place.
And I want to go deeper with you on so many things, but before we move on, can you share with us what does practicing self-love look like for you? Because I feel self-love is this word that gets tossed around a lot in the spiritual community, even on this podcast. You know, where self-love is, we all want it, but what does it concretely look like? I love to ask guests when they come on the show in your life.
Yeah, I feel like self-love looks like to me like when doing something or experiencing something that like feels really crappy, that I recognize that like the behavior or the situation or like what's going on isn't the real me. Like, so I feel like self-love for me has taken on a form of like being able to do like self-inquiry to really understand is that story or whatever is kind of happening in that moment, is that really true? Like if it's causing suffering, is it really true? Because in that moment, it feels so real. It feels so true. But what I've noticed is that when I'm able to give myself more space. So like one of my practices is like just like allowing myself to like slow down, give myself time, give myself like space, sometimes even by myself or space to like kind of work it out with another like trusted person in my life. That has allowed me to be able to love these aspects of myself that sometimes like come out, and sometimes I'm like, damn it, you again, like I don't like this part of myself. But recognizing that those parts of myself are actually like they're doing their best to like help me like in some way. So sometimes for me, like another practice I have is like when I have enough wherewithal to be able to recognize like, oh, this part that I don't really like is coming out in me. Like, how can I like approach that part like I would like my own child? Or for me, I don't have children yet, but I do have a little puppy dog. Like, how would I like approach this part with like unconditional love? And sometimes even asking that question then allows like that loving compassion to come out.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It sounds a lot like the idea that is so omnipresent in meditation and yoga, which is this idea that you aren't your thoughts, right? You are the space behind your thoughts. And instead of reacting to everything we think, we can create a little space, create loving kindness, create compassion, or even just not take so seriously all the different things we may be thinking. So thank you for sharing that. Tell us now about this idea of creating what you call your sacred offering. I love that. So someone, like we were using the example, someone wants to heal people. I remember I felt that way years ago, right? I had no idea how to execute on anything. I just knew I wanted to make a difference. I knew I felt like I was a healer deep inside, but I didn't know what that looked like concretely. I'm sure that's similar for many people who work with you and maybe for many of our listeners. What is this process then of how you figure out how to serve the world in a unique, specific way?
Yeah. I feel like the biggest thing is one reason why I love self-exploration is because I feel like it actually has like real world like purposes. Like it's not only for us, it's like something that can serve the world in a way. And so I feel like identifying like, how are you unique? Like like you have unique experiences, like you have unique skill sets, like what kind of keep coming up as like a pattern. Like for me, one thing that kept coming up was I would like leave a job that was like kind of around like training, teaching, curriculum. And then I would get into another job thinking this is totally different. different. And it would still, someone would be like, hey, can you like create this training for us or develop this curriculum for us? And so I started to just like accept that like this was happening and that it was something that was a skill that I had. So some of the work that I do with people is around identifying like where they're kind of uniquely fitted, like where they feel like they're just totally in the zone. And then also identifying like where kind of like the insecurities and like the shadows, like the things that they're learning from and still learning to work with. And like, how can your sacred offering then not only be something that's good for the world and serving the world, but it's also serving you because it's like bringing more of you out into the world.
What are some concrete questions you suggest people ask themselves when trying to come up with what their sacred offering is?
Yeah. One of the questions that I'll have people ask is who you want to serve and why you want to serve them. Because I feel like all of us, even if we don't want to work directly like with people, like for example, like if you don't necessarily want to work with clients one-on-one or work with people in groups or anything like that, you still in some way want to serve people and you still have a reason for serving them. So that's one question I ask people. Another way of looking at that is like, what is the problem that you want to solve? Sometimes I feel like the best way of accessing that, like what is the problem that you want to solve, is like, what do you see in the world that breaks your heart? Like, what do you see that's going on, either kind of in the world as a whole, or it could just be like your world, like right around you in the people that are closest to you. Like, what is it that you see that breaks your heart? And so being able to kind of identify like who you want to serve and like the problem that you want to be solving then can allow you to come up with a solution. So I kind of look at that as like, what is it, how do you want to do something kind of differently than what's already being done? Like what's kind of like your unique twist on it, for example, and then kind of pulling all of those pieces together then to create what I call kind of like this sacred offering, or like the gift, or the kind of like the vessel or the structure that you're offering yourself to the world in.
And can you give us an example of what that might look like for someone, either from a past client or just a made-up example, just so listeners can see, or I really want to visualize the process of, like I want to heal to coming to, okay, I'm doing something very specific.
So I had one client who he's a musician, and he's a musician, but he's like creating this movement around like eco-consciousness. And so for him, the basically the sacred offering that he created was like his vision is sort of like eco-consciousness. His sacred offering then is around like his music and how he's offering his music. And so he's been doing live events with like joint venture type of setups. So he's kind of like partnering with other people to be able to get his music out there. And then he's also like published, or I don't think that you use the word published in music, but he's also created an album of his music as well that's expressing this message that he has. So that's like one example, because I feel like artists like kind of fall into like a slightly different space than, for example, like service professionals. So like coaches, like their sacred offering, like one coach I know, she works with like heart-centered like business builders, so like heart-centered entrepreneurs, and like her sacred offering has actually changed over time. Like it doesn't have to be like you have one sacred offering and that's it. But originally it started out with her working one-on-one with people, and then it turned into this program, like a training program, but it was also like an immersive like retreat experience as well. So those are just like kind of some examples of someone being able to like bring their vision into their sacred offering in a way that's really unique to them.
Yeah, something I share with people a lot that I've found to be true in my experience is that often things that seem like they wouldn't work well together, like the idea of music and eco-consciousness, I mean, those seem like two different career paths, but it's actually the fusion, the alchemy of putting the two together that is what makes it so unique and what makes it your offering.
Exactly. I can't tell you how many times I've had people be like, can I put these two things together? Or can I put this thing in this? But it's like, if your sacred offering is like a meal, like you can have a meal with like one thing, you can have a meal with like a soup full of different things. So I think that it's not so much about saying like you can only, do it this way, or you only get like one thing. It's just like, how do you want to put it together in a way that feels really integrated?
Yeah, and that requires a lot of creativity, and we're not really told in school that you can make up whatever career you want. Has it been your experience in working with people that most of us feel like we kind of need to fit into a certain mold or a certain box? Have you found that to be true in your experience working with clients?
Oh God, yes. It's really crazy. I mean, I've experienced that, and I've seen it happen to other people. It's like, am I doing this right? Like, am I doing this the right way? It's like there isn't a right way. Like we make up our own rules, and a lot, especially when you are creating something like kind of from scratch or from your soul, from inside of you. There's a lot of experimentation in it, and it does take a lot of patience, does kind of take some level of like structure or plan, but that's something that you get to create yourself. It's not about following kind of these other like predetermined rules. Like, they haven't been written down anywhere. No one's hiding them from you. They're just something that you make up for yourself.
When you're creating something totally new, like what we're talking about here, I think what comes up for a lot of people is fear, right? Because you're paving a new way, or you're doing something that hasn't been done for you before, or you're combining two things that seem completely in opposition. What advice do you have for people when they're face to face with that fear?
Yeah, can really appreciate that, because that's something that I feel like anybody who's creating something from their soul is going to experience practically on a daily basis. And it's one, I would say you're not alone. Sometimes I think fear has this weird way of playing tricks with our mind and saying like, there's something wrong with you because you're feeling afraid. The other thing is, I would also, what happens for me is like when I am feeling fear around creating something or putting something out there, or a lot of times it's fear of the outcome, the like fear that the outcome won't turn out the way that I want it to. It's not always the easiest practice, but it's basically understanding like, what is like the outcome that you want? Like, what is that getting you? Like who do you get to be with that outcome? So for example, like if somebody wants to like say like work with like several new clients and are putting, all this energy into it, et cetera, and they're really hoping for this outcome, what is it that you think is going to be different when you're working with this number of people? And a lot of times, like what people will answer from that is like they'll feel more congruent, or they'll feel like they have more freedom, or they'll feel like they have more purpose. They feel like they'll have more focus. And all of those things are things that you can actually have or experience like right now. So a lot of times what helps me move through fear is not trying to like stomp it out or anything like that, but just acknowledging it, and then acknowledging where it's coming from, realizing that things are already okay as they are. And then I feel like that helps the fear dissolve a bit, and then it's easier to then keep going, because then it becomes fun.
So I was interested in what you were saying about the outcome. So it's almost like if there's something you want to have happen, realizing that whatever that's going to make you feel, you already have within you right now. Is that what you meant?
Yes.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I don't know, but do you think you could go as far to tell people or say to people that if they're feeling fear, that's actually a sign that they're moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I actually do believe that. It's sort of like, there's fear that feels like you're kind of like leaning off of the edge of a cliff kind of thing. Like you're on the edge, like how they talk about in yoga. It's like going to your edge. Like, and then, there's like, you can kind of tell the difference between fear, like, oh my gosh, like this is so big and I feel really good about it, but I'm like afraid it like won't happen. And like, I think that there's sort of like this fear, or I kind of think about it as like a contracting feeling of like dreading like what's going to happen. And I feel like that's a little bit different because sometimes like people are like, well, I feel afraid. Like, should I just not do it? And I think that it kind of depends on, if that fear also is kind of mingled with like this excitement. Like, do you really want that thing to happen? And then that's why you're feeling afraid? Then yes, I think that means like you're going in the right direction.
Yeah, fear and excitement are almost the same energetic quality, just with different lenses on it. And I love what you shared about the analogy of it being like a stretch, because I know as a yogi, and I'm sure yogis listening, you do know the difference, right? Between, oh, this is my edge, I'm stretching, this feels good, as compared to like, ow, I've just pulled a muscle. That's definitely going too far. And I think we can definitely use that to sort of see where we are on our own fear barometer, so to speak. The next thing I wanted to ask you about was what you call your impact plan, sort of the next step that you take people through when you work with them, because you might come up with a really cool idea. Like there's like, you want to fuse, like the musician and the eco stuff, something cool like that. But then it's like, how do you actually get into practical action? Vision, when we talk about vision, I really think about like sixth chakra. I think about the energy of light energy, right? Energy that hasn't yet been manifested on this plane of consciousness. And I think that's something that people can often really struggle with. Like they figure out that authentic vision that you talked about, but then it's like, okay, how do I work through the weeds of like setting up my first website when I have no idea what I'm doing, or, like whatever that next step is for them? What do you tell people?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's I like what you said about like the sixth chakra. Like, I had one friend who was telling me that she went to it was like kind of a yoga spiritual event, and they had all these different bins with different colored stones that were for each chakra. And like all of like the 7, 6, heart chakra and up, they were like gone or like almost gone. And then like the root chakra and the solar, maybe solar plexus maybe had some people picking at it, but like a lot of times like people who are really into like spirituality and inner work and growth, and people who are really visionary and empathic and feel a lot, like it can be challenging for us sometimes to then like take all of that energy and like put it into kind of more of like a structure. But what I've learned is that having some structure, not like a ton, but just having a really simple structure actually creates far more freedom, creates far more clarity, and it also creates far more like desired results. Like you actually are seeing like the plant grow. So I think it's a lot about helping people uncover like what is like their main objective, like what is their strategy around that, like a simple strategy around that, and then like how do they then implement that? Kind of, I call it an impact plan because it is taking action. It's taking action, and the outcome or the result or like the intention of taking that action is to create this positive impact.
So 2 things. One, Sivana listeners, if you haven't listened to the podcast episode, a couple episodes back with Anodeo Judith that I did, who's one of the world authorities on the chakra, she talks a lot about what Danielle and I are talking about right now, about how to manifest something, right? Because it's almost, I don't want to say it's easy to have a vision. Nothing's easy, but to actually execute on that vision is quite challenging. And that's where that current of manifestation, moving down the chakras, is incredibly important. And we have a whole episode on that. So make sure to check out the Anodeo Judith episode if you're interested. And then Danielle, the next thing that made me think of, and I wanted to ask you, was like, how do people find that balance between structure and freedom? And what does that look like for some of your clients? I mean, does it look like maybe waking up at a certain time each day and dedicating a certain amount of time, a certain time of the day to that vision? Or how do you kind of recommend that people set up that framework that you talked about?
Yeah, it does depend a lot on like the client, like their personality, even just sort of like their communication style. Like I have some clients who are like, I like to be like super hyper organized. I want to put everything in my like Google Calendar and like block out my times. Like, and then I have other clients who that would probably stress them out a little bit. They still do well with having kind of like, okay, this is my objective. And then like, maybe this is sort of like my general strategy. strategy for like achieving that objective. And like, maybe I'll like write in my journal about it, like make a short to-do list like each day or something like that. So I think that there's kind of different tactics for each person. But it's sort of like creating like whatever routine structure works best with your life right now. Because the other thing that I found is that sometimes what worked for you before might not work for you now. So you kind of end up having to like change your approach a little bit. Like somebody who has 3 kids, a dog, and a husband is going to be in a different situation than somebody who's living on their own and has a full-time job. I'm just kind of making these things up right now. But
it sounds like no matter who we're talking about, your message is that routine is important.
I do believe that some routine is important because it does create a balance, not only like in you, like kind of taking that action, but also in like self-care. Because that's the other thing that I noticed with the people that I work with. Like we tend to be kind of like driven people. And sometimes like when you get so connected to your vision, like all you want to do is like work on it all the time or like be engaged with it all the time. And there also needs to be a time to like kind of turn off or like recharge or kind of just do something different that maybe has no, at least surface level relationship with your vision so that you can kind of get juice from other areas too.
No, that makes perfect sense. And the last question I have for you really is around kind of your role and what it is you do. How and why would someone need to hire a coach or want a coach to do this work? I mean, I'm not doubting at all that there's value in it. I'm just wondering if you can walk for us and for the listeners too, like at what point does someone know that like they need help? Like they can't do this alone, just with a journal. Like they need to work with someone like you. And then when they do work with someone like you, what is that relationship like? Like how is working with a coach valuable or invaluable when someone's struggling with some of these issues?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. And I've worked with 4 coaches now at this point in time, and they've each kind of given me something different. So I think, it's time to work with someone, whether that be a coach or kind of a different type of practitioner, when you feel like you having that sounding board is going to be helpful. And actually, let me rephrase this. So I think that the best time to start working with a coach or a practitioner is when you want to have somebody else be able to help you see a bigger perspective. So I believe what a coach does is it's somebody who helps you step into a new model of the world. So a coach is somebody who is able to kind of see your potential, see where this vision can go, and they have a certain skill set that can help you then identify the answers for going towards that. So I've always personally liked working with coaches who are really good at asking questions. And that's one of the main things that I'm doing with my clients is asking questions to help them gain greater clarity, because we always know what our next step is. So a coach is really there. They're not driving the car for you. They're just sitting in the passenger seat with you, like not even holding the space for you, but like being in the space with you as you navigate these things that come up, like fear, like kind of self-doubt or feeling overwhelmed or maybe feeling confused. And I also think that the time to work with a coach is when you feel like you have something really big that you do want to take action on. So it's like you don't get in the car until you want to go somewhere. So when you want to go somewhere, that's when you can hire a professional who you feel is going to be able to help you move from point A to point B or Z, whatever that is.
I really like how you described it as the coach giving you a new model for the world, because I think so many of us, when we want to make a big change, we're calling on our family, right? Our friends to listen to us and to maybe help us take that next step, or using them as the sounding board like you talked about. But the reality is so many of those people kind of have a vested interest in us staying maybe where we are, right? Because that's like what they're used to and where they're comfortable. Has that been your experience?
Yes, it's like they're too close. Like I love my partner, my boyfriend Jonathan. Like he is so supportive of me, but sometimes I can be talking to him about something and he'll look at me like I have three eyes. Like he does not, like it's just not his, like it's not his space or his zone. And I also feel like our partners and our family, like they're not kind of, yes, of course they can support us, but they're not kind of meant to be our coach or our therapist or whatever it is that we would hire a professional for. So I feel like a coach is somebody who can help you access like your own unique genius, like be able to hold you accountable, not so much to like what you're getting done, but hold you accountable to your greater vision that you want to create.
I love that. Danielle, if there's one thing you really want Sivana listeners to take home, to take to heart after both of our conversations together, like a parting thought or word of advice that you really want them to remember, what is that?
I would have to just go with like, it's sort of like my tagline or my motto, but like, it's not just that to me. Like, I believe that the world needs the real you. That is a process of like uncovering like what the real you is. But I feel like whatever you can do today and tomorrow and the day after, like that helps you feel like you're being more the real you, like that is the direction that you want to go in. And that is the direction that's going to help the world in the biggest way.
I love that. And listeners, if you missed Tuesday's episode, Danielle does give a lot more tips about how to kind of uncover that real you by doing some healing work. Danielle, how can people stay in touch and find you online?
Yeah, so my website is DanielleLaRock.com, LAROCK, like The Rock. And I actually have, depending on when people are listening to this, I actually have a project that's coming up. It's a free service project that I'm doing because service work, community service work is really important to me. So this project is called the Heal You Project, and it's for 40 of my fellow world healers, my fellow mission-driven empaths and visionary entrepreneurs to be able to heal that deeper story that's keeping you trapped or stuck in misalignment or even disease like I was experiencing. So I'm really basically giving people a free session that's sort of like a taste of the breakthrough work that I do so that they can uncover like that deeper story. So they can go to my website, DanielleLaRock.com, and sign up there. And it's a project that right now I'm running it from February 5th through April 5th of 2018. So if they catch this episode after that, you can still check out my website. I may run this project again, or there may be some other resources that I can offer you at that point.
Amazing. That sounds incredible. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of people wanting to take you up on that. Many, many thanks, Danielle, on behalf of me and our listeners. It's been so fun connecting with you. And Sivana listeners, thank you as always for your encouragement, your feedback. Let me know what you thought of this week's episode with Danielle. We would love to hear from you, either in the private Facebook group or here on iTunes. You know, even if iTunes isn't how you normally listen to the show, the biggest way you can make an impact is by leaving us a rating or review right here. It's the easiest way to give back and to let me know topics and speakers you care the most about. Again, my goal is to make the podcast everything you want it to be. I'm thrilled to be on this journey with you. I hope you have a beautiful day full of yoga, meditation, and that you take some of these exciting concepts that Danielle shared with us to heart and start living into your sacred offering, authentic vision, and, you know, step into an action plan as well. Why not? So much love from my heart to yours. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Sivana podcast. To find out more about Sivana, go to SivanaSpirit.com or follow Sivana on Facebook at Facebook.com/SivanaSpirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at You've been listening to the Sivana podcast. To find out more about Sivana, go to SivanaSpirit.com or follow Sivana on Facebook at Facebook.com/SivanaSpirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at SivanaEast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Sivana podcast.